This podcast contains explicit content and is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Don't say we didn't warn you.
Hello, 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 and welcome. My name is Madison.
And I'm Hannah.
And you are listening to and or watching Who's Knocking?
A true crime podcast.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are back with part 2 of the story of Gary Heidnik. Somebody had asked an interesting question recently under one of our YouTube videos and asked I maybe, and I don't know what it was in regards to. Perhaps it was me saying like, this is the story of or whatever, being like, is this a story? Like, is that the correct thing to call something like this? I don't know. I don't really understand like if it was like because it's like gruesome material or if it's like because it's true or whatever, but I don't know. I thought it was an interesting question. And I do kind of describe all of these tales as stories, and I do think they are stories. It is the story of what happened. A story can be a true story or a fictional story, but it's still a story. That's my thoughts on that.
Agreed.
Hannah sent me an article this week. Apparently there's a big theory.
Yeah. I thought this was interesting. So, I mean, this might be something that's out there, and let us know if you know about this or have any thoughts about this. But I always thought that the OJ case was really open and shut, like he did it. But I just came across a theory that apparently his son might have been the murderer, which I did not know about.
I'd never heard of this theory before, and I read through the article. I have a couple thoughts. Personally, I still think he did it. But it does look like they didn't really look into him, the son, very much. I do think that the prosecution like found evidence against OJ and was like, oh, he did it. It makes sense. Let's go for it. Most people saw that trial. And like, obviously it was a very polarizing trial for other reasons. And there's to this day, probably a lot of people who still think OJ is innocent. But I
always thought he was guilty because it was just known how abusive and jealous and like he was stalking Nicole. Like there's known signs that he would have had a reason to do it and a pattern of violent behavior.
And the glove was definitely his glove.
It didn't fit Madison.
It didn't for many reasons, including the fact that he put it on himself. And
he's like, oh.
And he wasn't taking his arthritis medication, and it had gotten wet and it shrunk. And like, there's many reasons why it didn't fit. It was a stupid thing to do, but it fucking fit at the time.
Do you think there's a possibility? Yeah. Do you think there's a possibility that like him and his son both could have been involved?
I think if there was involvement, the more likely scenario would have been what this person was implying, that the son did it and OJ helped cover it up.
Yeah.
But
well, I'd be interested to hear if there's any like
actual
information
evidence
behind this theory. Yeah.
There's reasonable theories, and it's reasonable. Like there was like his hat was apparently left there, or a hat that looked exactly like a hat that he had worn in a picture with a dog,
and it had dog hair. Yeah.
He was working at the restaurant and a restaurant that Nicole was supposed to go to, and
he had a history of stabbing somebody already.
Yes, he seemed to be quite a violent individual.
Which, if OJ's your dad, I mean, he's probably modeling that behavior too from the beginning. So,
and there is the whole thing. I think maybe the most convincing is like he doesn't really have a solid alibi, and no alibi.
Yeah,
there's reason to look into him, and the police did not do that. And that is as far as I would take that theory. And I'd say this person should have been looked into. His alibi should have been checked out properly. But that's as far as I would take it. Now, there's a whole book written about this by somebody apparently, which maybe has more extensive thoughts about this.
Right.
But question to you audience, like, do you think they could have been somebody else.
Yeah.
Anybody know
Let us
anything
know.
about this? Anybody read that book? Now there's documentaries too. So many people are sending us like really interesting stuff. Somebody, um, shout out to Ben, who's been emailing us a lot. He sent me a lot of really great Israel Keys stuff that I've listened to. Oh my god. Oh my god. Listening to like all of his interrogations and like his confessions is just nightmares are made out of.
Okay, tell me,
Just
what's it
shout out.
like?
Well, it's just him, like the way that he describes the murders of some of the people that he murdered, the ones that he admitted to, is just chilling listening to him talk about them,
Oh,
and the way that he talks about it, because he's so like,
is he
oh
just
yeah, and
acts
then
like
I
he doesn't care
stabbed
at
him.
all?
Yeah, he's just so
Yeah,
chillingly
that's scary.
terrifying, and it's like so low key, but it's like really terrifying. And Ben
Yeah.
also sent, because we were talking recently about the Westminster Three, but there's I thought that I had seen every
Right.
documentary that there was made, but apparently not. I think it's like a multi-part Amazon series, or a series that is on Amazon.
Okay.
Um, I sent it to you, but I forget what it was called.
Yeah.
And I think it's more based on, it's more, it's like the Forgotten Three, and it's discussing
Oh,
the
more of the victims.
boys.
Yeah.
What was it
A lot
called?
of people say that they're like, they call the West Memphis Three the accused people and not the actual victims. I mean, they're victims too, if you believe that they're innocent, right, Madison?
Yeah, where was it? Yeah, I do. Of course, I believe they're innocent. Are
No,
it's called The Forgotten West Memphis Three. So that's now on my list as well.
right. Which is fair, honestly. People really don't talk about the kids too much.
Yeah, and now Jim Clementi is in this. So Jim Clementi will come up in this because he um did a bunch of commentary on Gary Heidnik. Jim Clementi is a retired FBI profiler, I believe. I think he was a prosecutor at
Okay.
one point and was a profiler with the FBI. And he worked on the show Criminal Minds for a really long time.
Got it.
Both as a I think as a consultant and also as a writer.
Mhm.
And he's also a part of a podcast that I haven't listened to in a while, but it's fuck, I forget what it's called, like Criminal Profiler or something, whatever. And it's him and this other woman who's also in some of the videos that I will play, named Lisa something. And she is a British woman, and I don't remember if she's a profiler or whatever, but she worked with Scotland Yard, which I believe is the UK equivalent of FBI, such and such, whatever. And they like
Yeah.
kind of go through different like famous crimes in like a very profile way kind of thing.
Okay.
And Jim Clementi, I like Jim Clementi. He's interesting. But yeah, I'm very interested in this theory about the OJ son,
Yeah.
because to me, it seems so cut and dry.
I thought so, but then reading the reasons behind it, there's definitely like
There's
there's
reason
some
to
reason. Yeah.
there's reason to want to rule it out.
Interesting.
So if anybody knows anything about that, I would love to hear about it.
Yep.
And with that little tidbit, I say we get into it.
Let's do it.
What say
I'm
you?
kind of nervous.
Yeah, you're ready. It's disgusting. Um, things are just gonna keep on a very severe downhill
Yeah, I
trajectory.
don't imagine that things are going to turn out well.
Yeah. So where we left off, let me give a little recap. Fine. So we in the last
Thanks.
episode,
That's really considerate of you.
a very generous recap. In the last episode, we introduced Gary and his childhood. His childhood was horrible. His father was horrible. His mother was uh his mother didn't appear to abuse him, but she was an alcoholic, and then she got cancer and she committed suicide, and that did not go well with Gary. He was in and out of mental institutions. He clearly is suffering from some major mental health issues, most likely resulting from his childhood. He impregnated a number of women, mostly Black women with intellectual disabilities, attempting to have a child. None of those instances worked out for him. He found himself a mail order bride from the Philippines. He successfully impregnated her, but she took off because he treated her so poorly. He started his own church. He made himself a bunch of money on the stock market, but he still did not have a child. And he developed this idea that he really wanted to keep 10 women in his basement, impregnate all of them, and have all of the women and babies completely dependent on him and basically be their god, essentially. And so he has gone about trying to achieve this goal, if you will. And so far, he has, at the end of the last episode, he has successfully kidnapped 3 women. He's been holding them in his dirty, nasty, disgusting basement.
Yeah.
He has them chained up.
Basement of nightmares.
Yes, just a horror. And this, as I said, he was a part of the inspiration for the character Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. One of the biggest things that Buffalo Bill does is he keeps his victims in a hole dug out in his basement. It's a little bit different of a hole, but a hole it still is. Yeah. So in that hole right now are Josephina, Sandra, and Lisa. And now we will go on to part 2. And this is where we meet Deborah Dudley.
Okay.
So only 10 days later from the last abduction, on January 2nd, 1987, Gary left the home and returned with another girl. And this was 23-year-old Deborah Dudley.
Okay.
Deborah was the feistiest of the group. The other girls had learned to take the abuse and to not fight back, as it only made things worse.
Yeah, that's so sad.
But Deborah repeatedly fought back at every opportunity. And I think that she also suffered from some intellectual disabilities. It's either they're a sex worker or they're suffering from intellectual disabilities. But I don't know that Lisa was. I don't think Lisa had any known mental health issues or anything. So that's a lie. But Deborah did. Not sure what, but it was something. So Deborah was not adapting to the situation the way the other girls had. And this caused Gary to be worse to everybody. So this was not great.
No.
So, and he started implementing a lot of stuff. He started really fucking with them. He started appointing one girl in charge every time he left. And most of the time, this girl would get chained up outside of the hole while the others had to be crammed together inside the hole.
Oh, so he makes it so they want that role because they're going to get a better.
Yes. So this girl would then have to report back about the behavior of the others. And if she had reported.
He wants to turn them against each other.
Yes. And if she reported that one of the other girls was misbehaving, quote unquote, she would then have to beat that girl. And if there was nothing to report, or if that girl did not beat the quote misbehaving girl harshly enough, Gary would beat all of them. This ended up obviously causing a lot of tension between the girls, especially toward Deborah, who was often the one causing problems or being defiant, but also towards Josephina. Josephina had been there the longest, and she had been studying Gary very carefully and had learned how to get on his good side. So she started acting almost like his confidant at every opportunity she could. And sometimes he would talk to her about his problems and his childhood gripes, and she listened and she pretended to give a shit. And this earned her the highest position in the hierarchy that Gary very carefully created among the women. And so, just as you were saying, he was pitting them against each other. And this was obviously his intention. He was playing God and causing issues between them so that they wouldn't gang up on him.
Yeah.
Because it's very difficult to control multiple people. But if you cause rifts between them and they're not united, it's much easier to control them.
So twisted.
He would do things like every so often he would bring them something good to eat. So he would usually feed them crap, like crackers and just like nothing, garbage, bread, whatever. And so sometimes he would bring them something good like Chinese food or a whole cake. And he would call these and he'd be like, this is a little party. He'd call these little events parties.
Oh, he's disgusting.
And because they were so rare and because they're literally living in hell, these were like the best. Like they loved it because like they got to eat something nice.
Mm-hmm.
And he would reward girls for having sex with him with food or treats or being allowed to sleep on a mattress instead of in the hole.
God.
So by doing this, they would actually fight over him, over who got to be raped by Gary, because that's still rape. Thank
That's
you.
the only way that he can like almost get a girl to want to sleep with him.
How disgusting is that?
It's beyond disgusting.
It allowed Gary to essentially trick himself into thinking.
I know he gets to feel like, yeah,
and make himself feel like they liked him.
Yeah.
And he also started making the girls have sex with each other, which is just so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So Gary had a very
I'm assuming he would want to watch it or something.
Yes, exactly. He would make them have sex with each other so he could watch it.
He's like the creepiest dude ever.
He's disgusting.
Yeah.
So he had a very specific system set in place now. Each time a new woman was brought in, the first night he would have them sleep in the hole. Once they began to comply fully, he would move them out to sleep on a rubber mattress. If they continued to obey him, they would be moved up to a regular mattress. And if they did not behave on any of these steps, they would be moved back to the previous step. Now, this was a very effective process for getting these women to fall in line, especially coupled with the other system of rewards.
Right.
Gary was really trying to create a culture among them where they had their own group dynamics, but also worshipped him as their leader, essentially.
Yeah.
So clearly he gets a little thing or two about human behavior and about he's group dynamics.
Smart. Yeah. He's a genius. I mean, he's a genius IQ, but he doesn't have he doesn't comprehend the social connectivity piece. Like
he doesn't have a soul, basically.
Yeah. I'm sure it was beaten out of him as a child, but yeah.
Yeah, but yes, that's why it's gone, but it's gone.
Yeah, definitely.
So finally, also, he started letting them have the occasional bath and providing them with baby wipes. What a saint.
Yeah.
Clearly, the hygiene situation had grown out of control since it was so dirty down there and they literally had nothing to wash themselves with and were literally living in a hole.
How long has it been at this point that they've been down there?
So Josephina was taken just before Thanksgiving, and it's now January. It's now New Year's. So Thanksgiving.
So he's kidnapped a bunch of women already.
Yep, he's got 4 of them down there, and it's been like 2 months. American Thanksgiving is November, and now it's January.
Right.
So he let them have the occasional bath and some wipes. But every time one of the girls was bathed, he took the opportunity to rape them and dirty them all over again.
I'm sure he did.
At some point, on top of all this, amongst their regular diet of shitty bread and water, mostly, he started feeding them dog food sandwiches. So he literally started feeding them dog food. And I believe this came out of a punishment for something that Deborah had done, but then just turned into their regular food. And like wet dog food, like disgusting.
Yeah, that is disgusting. And it's like, what can they do? They need to survive. Like they don't have any other food. Yeah.
Yep. So they're eating dog food.
Wow.
So on January 18th, Gary brought back a 5th girl. And this was 18-year-old Jacqueline Askins. She was a sex worker from the north side of the city. Gary had picked her up like the rest of them, brought her home, had sex with her in his room, and then dragged her down to the basement with the others. And she went through the same initiation process, the hole, the mattresses, whatever, and she was among them as well. Now, later in February, just a warning here, this is where things get really upsetting.
It's already so upsetting.
Yeah. Gary caught Sandra trying to move the planks of wood that were on top of the hole. As a punishment, he hung her from a single handcuff attached to a pipe in the ceiling so that she could barely touch the ground. And he left her like that for days.
Wow.
At some point, she began running a fever. And now at this time...
That's so sad. Oh my God.
Gary was under the impression and he believed that she was pregnant. So he was invested in keeping her alive.
Okay, got it.
So he kept trying to shove her full of food, but she couldn't eat because eventually she just started giving out. And this led to her slow and painful death.
Yeah, it's like let her down if you like, oh God.
Yes, he wanted to keep her alive, but he didn't simply unhandcuff her and let her down. Instead, he just kept trying to feed her and being like, and that's where it's like this man has no sense at all. Like he's
Yeah. I
he's
mean, I
just
don't think he has
watching
any
her
concept
die.
of how to nurture somebody.
No, and I don't think he's trying. He's very, very loose with the punishments. He's just punishing people constantly, left and
For
right,
sure.
and in horrible ways like this.
Yeah. Yep.
It
That's so
was,
bad. Yeah.
I think it was somebody stated it was the position that she was in that like essentially crushed her. And like her body just like collapsed in on itself. And also the lack of food and water and
And the
she
stress
died.
and yeah.
But things only got so much worse from there. And I know I keep saying that, but just, oh my God.
I
So,
mean, yeah, it keeps getting so much fucking worse. So I believe you.
and this is going to get really gross. So, like, just you've been warned. I'm so sorry.
Okay. I'm kind of ready,
So,
I guess.
Gary, he knew he had to dispose of her body properly because he had links to Sandra in the outside world in real life. So, he couldn't
Right.
just dump her. People were already suspicious of him. So when the women downstairs heard him start up a power saw, they just knew things were going to get really shitty. So eventually, Gary started bringing the girls upstairs one by one, and he made each of them dismember a part of her.
Wow.
This way, he created the idea among them that they were all kind of involved. And I
Of
don't know
course.
that they actually believed this, but like this was what he was trying to set up here.
And what choice do they have, right?
No, obviously they have to do it. And each of them,
Yeah.
like they've been interviewed. I've seen them all being like, I had to cut off her arm, like whatever, like I had to do this.
Is there any coming back from that? Like, can you
No,
recover? Yeah.
no, there is not. Once you have been in, like, once you've been forced to chop somebody's body up, somebody that you've gotten to know for like 3 months and be like endure a really horrible situation, like it's so fucked up.
Yeah.
You can't make shit up. That's that bad. So yeah, they all had to basically chop a body part of hers off. And so once Sandra had been put into small enough pieces, he started to trying to get rid of the pieces. He put some of them in the freezer and the rest he began cooking on the stove. The smell that came from this was overwhelmingly foul.
Oh my God.
The women described a horrible stench just emanating from Gary himself every time he came down and just from the like upstairs in general. Soon neighbors started smelling it, and one of them
That's
actually,
disgusting. How bad does it have to be that it's transcended the boundaries of the house and now it's getting to the neighbors?
and now the house is like it's a semi, it's like attached to it's in a row house. It's like it's
Okay,
one
got
house
it.
beside it is like attached to it.
But
Like,
still,
which is crazy when you think about them being in such close proximity to the neighbors. But yeah,
yeah.
the smell was just horrific. Um, and so a neighbor came to complain, and the neighbor, it just they described it as like the neighbor, he came, he like knocked on the door, no one answered. He could like see that there were pots on the stove cooking and whatever. And Gary eventually came to the door and he told the guy that he was cooking chicken and he fell asleep and burnt it. And the neighbor guy was like,
Okay.
oh, okay, cool. Like, it's gross, but like, fine. And so he left, just completely unaware of what he had just seen. So Gary knew that he'd had to dispose of Sandra's remains quickly and effectively. So what he did was he began mixing pieces of Sandra cooked
Okay.
into the dog food sandwiches that he was serving
Oh
the women.
my God. Oh,
That to me, this is what I was telling you. That's the worst part. I like, and they didn't
wow.
know.
Wow.
He had some sort of like food processor and he would blend pieces of her up.
He
And
really thinks it through. And that's what makes it so fucked up.
yeah. So he was getting rid of her body by feeding her to the others.
Wow. But he can't feed like all her body parts to them.
No, and he did not get through all of her body at the later when I'll tell you how much of her was left.
Wow.
So that's really upsetting. That to me of everything, like I think the murders are really bad and like everything is really bad. But to me, that is the most sick and disgusting and horrific aspect of this whole thing.
Yeah, that's pretty sick.
It's so sick.
It's very Robert Pickton.
Yes.
Also one of the worst people alive. So
yeah. So that happened.
Yeah.
And if you can believe it, it only got worse for these women.
Yeah.
So now one of them is dead. The rest of them are slowly eating her remains. They are being raped and tortured every single day, pitted against each other by their captor. And also, remember another aspect of this torture, which we forget a lot, is that the radio and random TVs are blasting all the time to drown out the noise. Like it's just loud. And like that is a very like torturous thing to happen
It
in and of itself.
And it is because this is like so not like that bad compared to everything else. But I remember when I worked at a store and the radio would play and they play the same songs over and over. So it does become a form of torture. Like even just that, it's like very stressful just to hear like the same thing over and over on a loop.
And it's played so loudly that you can't talk to each other, and you can't even hear yourself think. Like it's specifically
he's blasting it like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Everything. And like the radio and a TV and another, like it's like multiple things. So it's not even that you just get to like listen to music. It's like it's just noise.
Yeah.
So now Gary was starting to get paranoid, probably due to the fact that he had just murdered Sandra, which he technically didn't want to do, but he was having a hard time getting rid of her too. So he's getting a little bit scared.
I can only imagine this makes him more erratic. So
yes, and it's
great.
The paranoia was like, if you're these women,
it's never
a
good thing.
You're like, I don't need him getting paranoid on top of this.
Yeah.
So he started thinking that all the women were plotting to kill him, which actually kind of was true.
Oh my God.
Apparently, some of the girls had wanted Josephina to grab a knife from upstairs when Gary took her up there to bathe. That way that they could then stab Gary when he came down.
He would deserve it.
But Josephina actually told Gary about this plan.
Damn.
This move would put her in very bad standing with the other women, but it led Gary to really trust her, which, worked out later too. So this is like kind of a weird thing. Okay. And she kind of told the other girls, like, that's not going to work because he keeps the keys to everything upstairs. So if we stab him down here, we're still stuck down here and we just can't get out. And then we just left down here with a dead body. But anyway, now Gary was super worried about the women hearing him come down the stairs. So to ensure that they couldn't, and beware, this is really upsetting too, he started covering their mouths with duct tape and pinning them down and shoving a screwdriver or other sharp objects into their ears and twisting it.
Oh my God.
To deafen them so that they couldn't hear him coming.
Yeah.
Which is
pretty much
horrific.
Yeah.
And you have to imagine, like, he doesn't give a shit. He's just like shoving it in there.
No, I'm sure he doesn't.
He also started hanging them from beams like he had done to Sandra and putting gags in their mouths so they couldn't talk to each other. His biggest problem was that Deborah
Even Josephine?
I think she escaped a lot of this kind of stuff, but I'm sure not all of it. I know she had screwdrivers shoved in her ears. Like she was not treated like a queen or anything, she wasn't like, she wasn't exempt from this. But definitely of everybody, she was treated the best.
Yeah. It's a low bar.
Yeah, it's a very low bar.
Yeah.
So yeah, his biggest problem was Deborah. She was still just like not listening. And if you think about this, like, what a fucking like strong woman to be at this point, still putting up a fight. Like, that's insane to me. Was it the best strategy? Maybe not, as we'll see, but damn, that's like pretty impressive. But Gary knew that he had to do something about her. So the first thing he did was take her upstairs and show her all of Sandra's body parts, including her head, which was still in a big pot boiling on the stove.
Yeah.
Very a la Catherine Knight.
It's basically the worst thing someone could show you, but okay.
This seemed to scare the shit out of Deborah, and she quieted down.
Yeah.
Yeah, she quieted down for a few days, But after a few days, she was back to her regular ways. So he tried something else. So Gary stripped the end of an extension cord and plugged it in, and he put all the girls except Josephina into the hole. And he touched the exposed bit of the wires to their shackles. And he would watch them wriggle and convulse uncontrollably as he was electrocuting them.
Wow.
This horrible punishment seemed to do the trick. But as time continued to tick away, Gary began to trust Josephina more and more. And she was behaving very loyally to him and not fighting him and ratting on the other girls and helping him to punish the others. The other girls obviously did not like this. And
By the way, Madison, he had wanted to kidnap more women. He just has stopped kidnapping.
Nope, he'll kidnap more.
Oh, okay.
But this is, and I don't like, this is not in like such an extended period of time. Like this is, within a few days or whatever.
That's crazy. He's escalating so much.
Well, I think it's the death of Sandra really set him off. It made him really paranoid, and his paranoia led him to be even more savage than he already was, if that is even possible. Barely, because he's like, if people, like, he's scared to be found out. He's not accomplished his goal. He's not had one baby. So, and we'll get to it a little bit more later, but to this day, some of them and some people still blame Josephina for her behavior in all of this.
Interesting.
And, we'll get
to her you really can't blame any of these women for anything they do in this situation. Like, that's not really fair.
Agreed. And I think most people, you'll see why I think like she had a plan this whole time. But anyway, soon Gary had Josephina help him with the electrocutions. And to top this all off, he started adding water to the hole, just a few inches.
That's very dangerous, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh my God.
It could kill somebody. So Gary had all the women in the hole except Josephina. He had water in the hole, and he drilled some holes in the plywood hole cover thing and put the plywood hole cover thing on the women. He had Deborah, Lisa, and Jacqueline down in the hole, and he shoved the wire through the holes. And when the wire just barely touched one of the chains, all three would just be jolted with electricity. And then Gary pushed the wire through another hole, and this time it made contact with Deborah's chain, and she alone absorbed most of the shock. And she screamed super loudly, and then she fell face first into the water. And some people say, and some sources say, and it's very well may be true, that it was actually Josephina who dealt the fatal shock, but I'm honestly not perfectly clear on that.
And honestly, it doesn't matter. Like it was, she wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for Gary making her. So
yes. So the others began to scream and freak out until Gary finally removed the wood and pulled Deborah's dead body out of the hole. And then he said, "Aren't you glad it wasn't one of you?" before going upstairs. He later returned, and he gave Josephina a piece of paper and told her to write, quote, "Gary Heidnik and Josephina Rivera killed Deborah Downey by electrocuting her in a pool of water in the basement," end quote. And he had Josephina sign it, and he signed it himself. And then he told her that if she turned him in ever, that she would get arrested as well. And basically he was like, "You're a part of this. You and I both murdered her. You got it?" She was like, "Yes, that's what we're going with."
Wow.
And then he took all of the food out of his deep freeze and put Deborah in there. After Deborah was murdered, Gary started being slightly nicer to the girls. He brought them all better mattresses, pillows, and blankets, and a TV.
By the way, is he working? Oh no, he made money trading stocks, right?
Yeah, he's got money. He's always working on his church.
Oh yeah.
He began trusting Josephina more and more, and I think she did a Chris is moving a chair. I think she did a really good job at pretending that she believed that she would be arrested if he turned over that note. I have to assume she was making herself appear a lot dumber than she actually was.
Yeah.
Gary started bringing her along on outings to restaurants and shopping and things. And he was also sometimes letting her sleep upstairs in his bed. He shared a lot with her about his life. He told her that if she ever went to the authorities, that he would act insane and, do a insanity plea or whatever.
I thought she can't hear though. Didn't he?
They're not deaf. He just like really fucked around with their ears or whatever. Like they seem
Okay.
to like come out of it with hearing.
Okay. Okay.
Um, I
It
don't
just
know.
was like a painful thing,
Yeah.
obviously.
And it probably damaged, like, I think the ones who are still alive, they're like, they have some hearing loss, but not
Got
completely.
it.
On the night of March 22nd, Gary took Josephina and they drove out to South Jersey in a forest and dumped Deborah's body there. Now, maybe he truly believed or he hoped that Josephina was beginning to develop some sort of Stockholm syndrome. It seemed like he
Right.
really, bought into his own hype around her. And he
They
told
all
her,
do.
yeah, he told her he wanted to take her with him to go find another girl. And she said, yeah, sure, let's do that. But then she told him that she wanted to see her family. She had been his prisoner for 4 months and she was dying to see her family. And surprisingly, Gary agreed to this.
Yeah.
He didn't do it right away, but he said, yes, I will let you see your family.
Wow.
So the two of them were out driving around soon after this conversation, and they came across a girl named Agnes Adams. And she was a sex worker that Josephina knew. And actually, Gary was a previous customer of Agnes's. And they asked her if she wanted to hang out for the night. And since she knew both of them, she was like, yeah, sure. They went home. Gary took Agnes upstairs, had sex with her, and then he dragged her downstairs with the others like he had done 5 times before.
Of course.
The next day, Gary took Josephina to her family and agreed to wait at a gas station nearby. Josephina had been begging and negotiating for this for days. She promised that if he let her go see her family, she would bring back another woman for him. And Gary was super eager to complete his family and get to his goal of 10 women that he actually agreed to this. Now, some people say that he wanted to get caught, but criminal profiler Jim Clementi truly believes that Gary thought she would come back. He thinks that Gary really bought into his own hype and that he thought he had her under his control. And a
He was
lot of that,
completely delusional, so I don't see why not.
yeah, and a lot of that I think is because she worked really hard to make him believe that.
Yeah.
So if you will, Hannah, your the link I sent you started
Okay.
at 29:16 or there around,
Okay.
and watch until 30:09.
Okay.
He went back to the house. She went upstairs and did something with them. He brought her down, put her in the basement, put her in a hole, and then he says, all right, you want to go see your family? Let's go see your family. I said, okay, good.
He starts to trust her, and that's actually the start of his downfall. He's the great manipulator, but ultimately she wins on the manipulation level of getting him to trust her.
I said, I'm not going to take you with me because they're going to be asking a whole lot of questions, which is going to become very uncomfortable. I said, there's a gas station at 6th and July. I said, you'll be able to go in there and grab you some coffee. I'll be like 15, 20 minutes.
Wow.
So, as you heard in that video, so Gary dropped Josephina at her boyfriend Vincent's apartment. And this guy seemed kind of shitty. Like, it doesn't seem like he did much to like go looking for her. He was shocked to see her, and she began telling him what happened. He didn't really believe her at first because it sounded so crazy, but soon she convinced him, and the two went to a payphone and they called for help. The police got on it and they arrested Gary right away. Can you imagine rolling into a scene like
I'm
that?
glad they were rescued like that, but that's, yeah, I couldn't imagine. No,
There's
photos, so
yeah,
I
and
can
there's
kind of imagine it, but
you'll have seen photos. If you're watching YouTube, I've
yeah.
included photos, and it was a quick takedown, and a lot of people showed up right away because of how horrific it was. But like, I was watching a show, I was watching a movie. It was actually a really good movie, Jake Gyllenhaal movie about cops and like just it's like some LAPD officers, and it's like this stuff that what is so fucked up about being a cop is like you are the first people to roll up on like just anything. Like anybody else who will
Yeah.
later have to deal with the consequences or whatever fallout from this specific situation, they will have been like somewhat prepped before like meeting Gary Heidnik or meeting any of the victims or whatever. But the
Right.
people who just like were like going about their day, doing my job, blah blah blah, and then they're like, oh, I have to respond to this thing at this address, and they just like get to the address and like this is what they find. Holy shit! You just like
Yeah.
you never know what horrible craziness you're just gonna stumble upon. Like, what
Yeah.
a shocking thing to find. And then finding they pulled 27 pounds of human remains of Sandra from that kitchen.
Yeah.
And she was just in the
Well,
freezer. She was on the stove. She was in the oven. Just insane.
yeah.
So after that point, Gary was charged with 2 counts of murder, multiple counts of rape, kidnapping, assault, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, indecent exposure, false imprisonment, unlawful restraint, among other things. Gary's defense included the claim that the women were already in the house when he moved in.
Really?
Are you fucking kidding?
Like you can
they
try a
were-
little harder than
He
that.
literally was like, they were there already.
Okay.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
Gary's lawyer also put forward an insanity defense, like he said he would. And he asked Gary not to shower or shave for the months leading up to his trial. So he was
Well, fuck this defense lawyer. You trying
Yeah.
to get him off?
He was well, that is his job. He was
I mean, just don't try when you have a client like that.
I so there's a really big like back and forth among a lot of people who talk about criminal defense lawyers because somebody has to defend the worst of the worst. And
Yeah,
it's like
but
a
just
really
don't give him advice like, hey, make yourself seem crazy, or like just be like, yeah, I'll do the insanity defense, and then just
yeah, but if you don't try your hardest, then you're not going to do well at being a defense lawyer. Is I don't know. It's a hard thing to argue.
Just for these specific cases. Like if you're defending somebody who was kind of like, I don't know, like you did something kind of shitty, but like, whatever. There are definitely victimless crimes, or there's crimes that are not this bad.
Yeah.
Like when you get somebody of this caliber, it's just like.
But I think also like this man like sees the evidence. He knows this guy's not going anywhere. Like,
yeah, that's
he knows
fair.
he knows that this person is at minimum going to prison for life. Like he knows he's not an idiot.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So, fair
that's
enough.
Fair. Yeah.
But Gary was disgusting and gross for his whole trial. And that was,
that would have been the case either way.
The judge and jury did not accept the insanity defense or the defense that the women were just there already.
You don't say.
And he was convicted of 2 counts of murder in the first degree, 6 counts of kidnapping, 5 counts of rape, 4 counts of aggregated assault, and 2 counts of involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, and received the death penalty. Good. Initially, his team did file an appeal. But after that one appeal that was unsuccessful, he asked his attorneys not to file anymore, and he wanted to be executed as quickly as possible. Gary's last meal was 2 slices of pizza and 2 cups of coffee, and he died.
Oh, last meal. Okay.
Yeah, and which got me into this big list of all these.
Also,
people
yeah, I love what I don't know why that's so interesting. There's a blog
so
that like remakes all of them, but also pizza with coffee. Really? 2
slices of pizza and 2 cups of coffee. And he died by lethal injection on July 6th, 1999.
Okay, bye.
Never got to see the millennia. Yeah, see ya. So Josefina did not attend the execution, and she commented that, quote, "It would have been better to sit in a 4x4 cell," end quote. And I kind of tend to agree with that. I mean,
for him, like he should have been in prison.
She thought it would have been a better punishment for him to like spend the rest of his days in prison.
Yeah. Prison is literally better than what he did to them, which is so fucked up.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Unless he's in like a war prison in Iraq, then it's on par.
Yeah. 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 But yeah, I think it's an interesting like thought. And you kind of don't know until like you are the victim of something like this, and like you get to be there and decide what you think is better.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
After Gary was arrested and executed, Josephina went back to sex work for about a year until she finally gave it up. And since then, she has been a waitress, a clerk, a security guard, and a daycare worker. And she has gotten her life back together. She's reconnected with her 3 children and is a grandmother.
That's insanely impressive.
Yeah. And a lot of the other girls are like still out there, like doing interview. They've done some interviews along the way. You can find a lot of that on YouTube.
Yeah, the interviews are interesting. Even just watching that little clip.
Like, sorry, I don't know what anyone's seeing of me, but I'm very uncomfortable. Josephina also wrote a book on her experiences called Cellar Girl. And as I only found out about that halfway through my research, and I did order it, but I didn't get it until after I finished. So I've only read little bits of it.
You can update us.
Yeah. Excuse me. Josephina, Jacqueline, and Lisa. I don't think this includes Agnes, but to this day, they still live with hearing impairments due to Gary's attempts to deafen them.
Wow.
And obviously, all of them have psychological effects.
I mean, yeah.
It's clear that these women were chosen because they were people that Gary assumed wouldn't be missed. All were Black, poor, some were sex workers, some were mentally disabled. And it didn't seem like the police were too concerned about any of their disappearances, nor had the fact that 6 women were kidnapped, were taken, plucked right from the street. Nobody put that together. There was no like, oh my God, all our women are missing. Where are they? Like, none of that.
Yeah. I mean, had he picked different women, then,
Yeah. And a big question that a lot of people ask is, why were they all Black? And Gary's lawyer offered up an explanation that he claims Gary told him, and it's like quite astonishing.
Oh, okay.
So here's that. So Gary's lawyer, do I have his name? No, I don't remember. He says, quote, he was trying to enslave 10 girls to have a baby with all of them, and he was going to create a perfect race. He believed that the races eventually, hundreds of years from now, would all be mixed, and there would only be one race. And that's when he would find peace, when we would find peace as a society, whatever. He believed white people should mix with Black people and vice versa so that they could get closer to a perfect race. He believed tall people should mate with short people and short people should never mate with other short people. He had theories and thought he was going to improve society. End quote.
Yeah, you're exactly the person that I want to improve society.
Yeah, but it's kind of interesting because
do you think he really believes that?
I don't know. I have no idea if that's true or not, or if I think Gary also was pretending.
He's like, I'm not racist. I want to create a perfect race in a world where racism isn't a problem anymore. Like, yeah, I'm so sure that was your motivation.
It's like, what do you give a shit about any of that?
No.
I do think to me, it seems like Gary was trying to portray himself as like much more insane than he was, because he wanted the insanity defense, and that's how he thought he was going to get off. And that's clearly a motivation of his, and it had been for a while. He told Josephina that. I know that he definitely had issues, mental issues for sure, but he was not like legally insane. He did not fit the
he was in control of himself, and like obviously I'm sure he was very compulsive. I think a lot of things show that, but he was aware, let's say.
I think it's very possible that he put forward this idea to his lawyer to make himself sound crazy.
Yeah, I'd buy that.
And I think it's very possible that he was just attracted to Black women. Because he could have, like, there's no reason he couldn't have found like white sex workers or like white, like the fact that they were Black, either like he was like attracted to Black women, or like he believed this whole thing, or he really thought that Black women would not be missed over white women. That's possible too. But I think, there was lots of poor white prostitutes as well. So I don't know. Anyway, it's a lot of theories there.
Yeah.
Another big question for many was regarding Josephina's involvement. initially, after Gary was arrested, the 3 remaining girls wanted to press charges against her too. They
Wow.
felt that she was responsible for killing Deborah and that she got involved with Gary pretty deeply. Clearly,
I mean,
the DA did not press those charges and felt that Josephina had been forced to do what Gary told her
of
to do.
course, yeah.
And to this day, there does seem to be quite a bit of a divide online between people who believe that Josephina willingly was involved in the torture of the girls and Deborah's death.
You
And
can't
those who
say
think-
that. Like, she was tortured so much. Like, nothing about that was consensual.
Yeah. And then on the other side, it's those who think that Josephina was playing the part in order to gain Gary's trust, which she hoped would lead to their freedom.
I think the evidence points to that, because that's what she did.
I agree. And she was
so insistent on, like, listen, if you don't do this, like, if you don't go check soon, he's going to kill those girls. Like, you need to go right now.
Yes. She took the first chance she got to stab him in the back and
and save them too, not just save herself, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think what she did was extremely smart. And that is exactly, she was able to manipulate him. She was able to make him believe. And it's not easy because, like, he's not an idiot. You can't just be like, oh, like, trust me. Like, you have to really trick somebody into trusting you so much so that he dropped her off at her boyfriend's house. That's crazy. Especially because, like, we know
really crazy.
We know how paranoid he was. We know how he was putting everything he had into this plan.
The only reason why I'm not shocked that he did that is because in several other kidnapping cases, they do that. They'll hold a woman hostage for a really long time, like longer than this, like years and years and years, like. And then they'll be like, yeah, you can go see your family now. And a lot of the times that's where the case ends. The girl's like, all right, or go arrest him.
The girl in the box, wasn't that?
Yes. And she was in there for like 17 years or something like that. And then he was like, yeah, go see your family. And didn't she go back afterwards too? Yes. And I think she only left. So she did believe enough in the psychological torture.
Exactly. And that's, I think, where that narcissism aspect, like, comes back to bite you in the face, because you truly believe that you are superior. You don't you believe that other people can't manipulate you back.
Yeah.
And
thank God they have that, like, blind spot.
Like, it's both what makes them so dangerous, but also where you can, like, slide in.
Thank God. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that does seem to be still, I was reading an article about Deborah, and someone was like, I knew Deborah. That was like, it was like, I don't know if it was a family member or something, but they're like, Josephina did that. She killed her and blah, blah, blah. Like, there's quite a bit of issues or animosity towards Josephina. And the other girls, like, there was one, it's like they all, like, kind of came back together at one point, and Josephina explained herself to, I think it was Jacqueline, and finally Jacqueline, like, forgave her or whatever, and that kind of feud ended. But
that's good.
It also just shows you, like, what a deep divide he caused between them.
Yeah, definitely,
and intentionally so. And so that's pretty much the whole story. The Buffalo Bill character, I think the biggest things were, like, the hole that he dug and like, keeping them captive in the movie. Like, he was always playing music really loud to drown her out. It was like his methods were very much Gary Heidnik, whereas like his the way that he lured girls in was, like, very Ted Bundy. He had the cast.
Yep.
He brought them into his van and shit. And then it's like what he did with them was
fetish or whatever. Yeah.
The woman's suit.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting, because, like, it's a really, like, well thought out character, and, like, if you're any sort of, like, true crime buff, it's very interesting to see all the different aspects in Buffalo Bill. Or what was his name in it? I don't remember.
James Gum.
Yeah, is that the actor's name or the character's name?
The character, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's such a good movie.
It is really good. But this is fit like the worst thing basically.
This to me is like so much like Silence of the Lambs was like, okay, let's not go too far.
Yeah, Silence of the Lambs is like a nice light like palate cleanser after this.
Yes. And I mean, there was the cannibalism with Hannibal Lecter. But to me, the worst part
but they made him have redeeming qualities. So it's kind of like,
the worst part is the fact that he fed Sandra to the other girls. That's to me is the worst part.
Yeah, I kind of think like a lot of things are just, there's like a certain level where it's like, this is the worst that something can get. And like a bunch of things are on that level in this, in my opinion.
It's one thing to be a cannibal. It is another thing wholly to force other people to eat other people.
It's really bad, but I think the screwdriver thing too is on par. The whole like just everything, like so many things, like to me, like it's all like,
horrible.
Yeah, like I don't even think that's worse than the rest of the things.
That was the thing that gave me the like worst visceral reaction where I was like, oh my God. I remember like this is very much like Antel Kids for you. Like I was going through it. And I started like really getting into it and I'm like halfway through and I'm like, should I do this? Like, I
understand why you felt that way.
And I even right now, like we've recorded 2 episodes and I'm like, it's so terrible.
Yeah.
Where would you rate this on a scale?
I mean, 10, like that's not
to me,
a
this is an
question.
obvious 10.
Yeah. Let us know if you agree or disagree. But
yeah,
this is like one of the worst things I've heard. And I've definitely heard of this case before, but I just forgot or just like didn't know a lot of the details. But like, I'm surprised. I guess the reason that things like this and the Anthill Kids aren't as known is because it's like, there's not the element of like, like John Wayne Gacy dressed as a clown, like Ted Bundy, people think he was hot. Like there's not like, it's just like, it's just all horrible. There's nothing that's like, well, that's kind of interesting about him.
Yeah, it's just all so horrible and disgusting. And I think like even people who are interested in true crime are like,
like even we don't really like talking about him.
It's like, that's a little much,
Yeah.
Well, I know that I'm very happy to have this man now out of my life, done with you, because he has been haunting me for a little while now.
Yeah, I could definitely see why.
And please let us know what you think about this. Is this?
Do you like case? Yeah. Do you like this?
Too
much? Was this okay?
Like, or did we scare you off? Like, did you make it?
People
this far?
Like, is anybody? Yeah. Yeah, I definitely need to go like be amongst my sweet dogs after this.
Yeah, I want to go like watch The Office or something before I go to bed.
Yeah.
Wow,
really?
Yeah,
really?
I'll probably listen to something else gruesome like as I fall asleep, but
okay.
Not this bad. I don't like to listen to stuff that's this bad as I'm falling asleep. It just is probably not good,
yeah.
Probably not good.
Probably not good.
But I'd definitely be interested to hear other people's input on like, is this too much?
Yeah, just let us know like where's the bar for you?
Yeah. Instagram at Who's Knocking Podcast, Twitter at Who's Knocking Pod. Oh, we do have Facebook as well for all you middle-aged ladies. Is that rude? Facebook is dying, eh? There's no young people on it. Yeah, it's totally dying. But we're on it if you are.
Yeah, check us out.
Hello at whosknockingpodcast.com is our email address. I always get weirded out because it's not Gmail. But it's hello at whosknockingpodcast.com.
Mm-hmm.
We love to get your mail. People do email us, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And if that's it, please, dear God, stay safe out there. Do not get into anyone's car if they offer you a ride, no matter what.
Don't accept any drinks that random people offer you. Just
steer clear of other humans in general.
If somebody runs a church, but it's like their church, don't go to it.
And listen carefully to what's going on in the basement if you happen to be at someone's home church. You never know. Because you never know
who's knocking.
Good night. This podcast is produced in collaboration with Lost Line Media. Artwork by August Digital. Music by Matthew Cook.